How do you design a system for a book project? Why might you want one? And how does that system affect the pacing of a book project? Those are some of the things that we talk about in this very intro level conversation about some theories related to book design. In addition, we have a bonus section. If you're a student and you have book designs in your portfolio, how much of that do you need to show? And how much of it do you even need to design for it to be a real project? What's up? This is MVA Joshua. This video covers some basic stuff related to book design or anything sequential. These questions come from my Intro to Typography class through Minneapolis College of Art and Design this summer. The questions are from Brian DeSimone. Thank you, Brian. If you have a question that gets brought on by this, please leave it. In addition, we discuss portfolios and how books fit into them. So when you're designing a book, how much of the book do you have to show? And how much of the book do you even have to design? Hint, not the whole goddamn thing.
You had mentioned on a couple people's projects, you said consider coming up with a system. I mean, are there lots of situations where you want to come up with a system in advance anyways? And if so, what are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so I would back it up and say, you don't necessarily want to come up with a system in advance. You want to make a bunch of stuff, get to an appropriate point in the process, and then extract the system from it. Once you have stuff you're happy with, then it's okay, what's the system that's here? What do I have here? And how can I figure out how to repeat it? And this is one of those things where especially for books or animations or whatever, motion graphics, the idea of repetition and variation is your best friend. And again, you can be this is a David Carson photo book called Photographics. That's a collection of his photography. And then there's all these kind of graphic elements within it. And you can't really see it from there, so sorry. But there's no system. This is basically, there's no page number, so I couldn't tell you how many pages it is. But I think it's safe to say it's a 192-page collage. That would be my guess. Now, there's something extremely ambitious about that and something extremely rewarding. And in looking at it, it's rewarding. But the other thing is the amount of mental steam that you have to basically make 192 posters. It's kind of what it comes down to. It's super difficult. At the same time, you can take this is this book, Hand Job, the collection of hand-drawn type that my friend Mike made a long time ago. So here's an opening spread. Each of these little things is an artist bio. Part of the system is there's just this one font, Bryant, Process Type Foundry, running throughout. And then each artist sent a scan of their handwriting with their URL. And then Mike drew in a big letter of that section. And then there's a scan of a color behind it. And then that whole section uses that color. So you have this book that's crazy vibrant. You can see it in, trying to hold it so you can kind of see the edges. We'll just flip through it. There's a color for every single section. If you looked at this book at a glance, you would think that it's this super custom thing, but it's really not. It's a set of a couple of templates for laying out spreads. You've got a big image spread, and then you've got, this is a nice example, one side's got a margin, one side's full bleed, and then it hits the next page. Both sides have a margin. And then we've got a way of dealing with a big image and a small image. This system is really it's this one font, there's a caption system, and then there's a colored background, and you just repeat that stuff at intervals throughout. And then it creates this sense of I don't know what you want to call it, chaos or collage or whatever. So it's if these pages in this book repeated, no one would know. It's so dense and experimental that the fact is, you could have taken like 20 of these spreads and then just repeated them every 20 pages. It would totally work. But that's so much labor. That's like, I don't know if it's rewarded necessarily. So I tend to look at like, this thing is like a nice example of a system. And then it creates contrast because the F's, there's only 2 artists in the F section. Rather than freak out about it, you go, oh, that's cool. That means that page looks different than the rest. When I was like working on the book at one point and I saw one of Mike's books on his computer unfinished, and I realized how simple the thing he was doing was, it kind of blew my mind because I was like, you're just like, you've got a couple of rules, and he's not like he's a book designer, but he's not like a book designer. He doesn't get like these big crazy ideas. He just sets up a couple simple things and then just repeats them. Here's a 2-page spread. Here's a spread with 4 images. Here's a spread with whatever drawings, however they work. I tended to be like even simpler than that. My moves sometimes would just be like, oh, this section of the book will be the exact same layouts, but the backgrounds will be black. And then it doesn't matter where they show up because they automatically contrast the whole rest of the book. It's not like a big brainy move, but it's a simple like little rule that makes something come together. Oh wait, here it is. This book, which is, you can't really read it, it's called Function, Restraint, and Subversion and Typography. It's got these brutal rules. Page numbers are gigantic, and then the section for each artist is this huge type that's the same size. And then it's got some simple ideas like there's a horizon line that everything respects throughout the whole book. Then what that means is when you violate this horizon line, it blocks the page number and it does something that isn't insane, but it's just a little bit dramatic. So like this book, it's kind of brutally simple, but because it's got these really basic rules, then you get like a natural amount of variation within the system. Because otherwise the layouts are, I think they're identical the whole way through. Like text columns are always half of the page. They're always on the left-hand side. They're never on the right. And then interviews are black. That's what I mean by a system. And I think you can extract a system from almost anything. I could take that David Carson book, pull out 10 spreads, and then be like, here's how the system works. And then that kind of makes life easier for doing something that's that ambitious.
No, I like the concept a lot. Starting with make a bunch of stuff first and then extract out the parts that seem like they'd be a cool system and then start to build a system from that. I think that's like very inspiring. Sounds like a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, definitely do that. The insane thing that people do is they get it in their head that they should like come up with a grid and a system first. And then they like basically put handcuffs on themselves, and then they wonder why they can't finish the thing because it's a boring, horrible thing that they've just decided to do.
If you hadn't said that, I would 100% have been me handcuffing myself.
No, like we designed this book first. We designed the spreads. Then we figured out how they worked. Then we slightly adjusted them because they were like organic, and grids is generated by InDesign are not organic. You can usually find the grid that sits under what you've made. Then we slightly adjusted it.
You were talking about how with like a bigger layout, a bunch of pages are like a little bit more dense, but then you kind of want to like break it up a little bit with like something more to breathe, and there's sort of like a natural contour happening. Similar to the other question, like how much are you planning that? How much is that on your mind when you're
like for books? I do it on the fly as part of the process. So like with that book, when we worked on it, we had a studio with a big giant wall, and every time you finished a spread, you printed it and you taped it to the wall. So that way you were constantly seeing essentially like this animation of the pages, and you could just look at it and be like, same. We've got to do something right in the middle here. The other thing is that we would just make really crappy mock-ups of stuff. And then you sit with a cup of coffee and you read the book like it's a real book. Because the thing is, you can get too caught up in the animated part of it, and you're not paying attention to like the reading part of it. So that's like, it's kind of constantly seeing it from different views. But yeah, with that book, it was like big size printouts. But then the book before that, we had to do in my living room. So we had little tiny printouts, and we would just lay them across the kitchen table, and just move things around and be like, okay, we should do one of these layouts over here. So that kind of helped. And then we would just run over and be like, okay, like you can, sometimes it was as simple as like that there's one record on this page and two on this page. We just need to flop it. And that's all it's going to take. And then other times it'd be like, okay, we got to do a totally different layout for this page because we haven't had like a detailed page in a while. They've been too big and blunt. It's sort of like whatever it takes. But I think the biggest thing is you don't want to do it with PDFs. Exporting a PDF and then trying to judge that where you get sucked into this like click, 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 click activity. It's like you need something that lets you see it in a way that is divorced from the screen, not because the screen is bad, but because the screen is associated with scrolling and clicking. And there used to be I don't know how, there was this website Issue. It's like basically it's like you could post PDFs there and like embed them and stuff like that. But what I noticed was that no matter what I made, no matter how many pages, you could see these stats. It was like YouTube stats of how far into them people read. And nobody gets to the end because they're just hitting the down arrow. So that leads me to believe you can't give a PDF of a book to someone and be like, hey, tell me about the pacing of this, because they will ignore the pacing because they'll be like, bah, 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 bah. So instead you got to give them like a mock-up or something and be like, okay, tell me about the pacing of this, because like they'll look at it like a book and not like a thing that they need to, not like a bizarre, boring video game where they got to hit an arrow a bazillion times. The other thing is like you could just print, we would print spreads of thumbnails out of InDesign, and then you'd look at like 4 of those and you could kind of get a feel for stuff. So it's just this constant battle of whatever it was that would let you see it fresh.
So that's some basic stuff related to book design. If that prompts any questions from you, please leave a comment so we can break it down and unpack it further for you. This next clip comes from my portfolio expansion workshop, and it's about if you're designing books for your portfolio, how much of the book do you have to design and how much of the book do you have to show in order to have a portfolio piece. After that, we've got a preview of the next episode, which is about the designers Peter Saville in non-format and what you can learn from looking at how they work. Not the work they make, but looking at the model of how they make work.
For like a magazine or a book, how many pages do you think should be shown to get an idea of the booklet without having the physical book?
Nobody really does this, but let's say it was like you designed a novel. Well, you don't actually have to show that much to explain the design of a novel, right? You're going to have, what does a chapter page look like? What are 2, maybe even 1 spread of the chapter look like? Then you're going to show us another chapter page, another spread, and then, I don't know, like the back cover and the front cover. Because we understand novels, we don't need to see a whole lot of that. Since you don't have to design the whole thing, I think it comes down to you need to design as much as it takes to tell the story and to showcase your level of ambition. The biggest thing is just avoid being mind-numbing. If you're scrolling through it and you can just tell, oh, this is basically the same layout again and again, 3 times is probably fine. But then if you're doing something where it's like, it's constantly changing, and to show the flexibility of the system or all the different things that you've built into it, it may be justifiable to show 20 spreads. So I think it's really individual, but I think the biggest thing is avoid the thing where it looks like you're just trying to prove you did something. So here's a magazine, here's the cover, here's 2 spreads. That just looks like you're trying to get credit for work not done. At that point, I would be like, okay, either design a whole bunch of the interior or design 3 more covers and get something, either have width. So like in this type of project, like what would width be? A bunch of the covers. Or depth. Depth would be design lots of that magazine and show how it works. Always pick one as a priority, and then you can always build it the other way once you've done that. So if you prioritize depth on a magazine design, that means you flush out more and more of it and you figure out how it's going to work, if it's going to have different systems and sections. And then once you've done that and it feels done, when you have time, you can then go for the width. Let's do 2 more covers. All of a sudden, that's a very rich project. And then you could do that again where you're like, okay, well, I've shown this. Why don't I do another feature article for each of those pieces I did covers for? all of a sudden that one little magazine has gotten big and realistic. But the biggest thing is just think about like the story and imagine you talking about it. Do you have something to talk about for every time you show a spread? If you don't, you might have too many spreads. And the thing that I think is really important about both of these is that these are designers working in exactly the way that they want to be working, not working in the way that's dictated by whether it be a super narrow chunk of the population, like say ad agencies, or by the way that design teachers think that they should be working, or sort of barely by the history of the medium. Because of that, I'd say they produce a massive amount of work. Because when you get to do exactly what you want to do in the way that fills you with like the most energy and the most joy, you make a lot more work.